Hey guys, in this 1-hour video tutorial, you'll be learning the basics of AutoCAD. So what is AutoCAD? Well, AutoCAD is a product released by the company Autodesk, and it is one of the most widely used design and drafting softwares in the world. CAD stands for Computer Aided Design. It is a software used to create 2D and 3D drawings that has effectively replaced the traditional method of drawing and drafting on paper. Back then, in order to save storage space, many companies had to scan or photograph these drawings onto microfilm, which are these tiny photographic film strips or sheets. Then you would use these super clunky machines called microfilm readers to enlarge the contents of the microfilm so that you can read it. Now with the advancements of computers and softwares, we don't have to worry about any of these things anymore. So that's a quick history lesson and where AutoCAD fits into the picture. So if you haven't downloaded AutoCAD already, then you can come to this website where you can try AutoCAD free for 15 days. And if you're a university student, then check with your university to see if you have free access to AutoCAD's products. Or you can come here to complete a quick verification to see if you qualify for the free subscription plan. Alright, so once you have AutoCAD installed on your computer, open it up so we can get started with our tutorial. Okay, so now that we have AutoCAD open, let's create a new drawing. This is the interface of AutoCAD, and as you can see there are a lot of buttons, and it's really easy to get overwhelmed, which was exactly how I felt initially when I first started learning AutoCAD. But as you follow along this tutorial, things will slowly start to make sense. So right now you can see that we're in the model space, which is indicated by this tab down here. We also have some layout tabs down here, and we'll get to this later. So the model space is essentially the heart of your drawing, and it contains all of the lines, blocks, and so on. To navigate around the model space, you can zoom in and out by using your mouse wheel, just like I'm doing here. And to pan around, simply hold down your mouse wheel and move your mouse around, just like this, and you'll see a little hand pop up. If you come up here, you can see that we have a few drawing options. So if you just click on the line option, you can see that now we're getting a prompt to specify our first point. And here you can see that the prompt is displaying some numbers. Essentially, these are the coordinates of the first point of our line. And as I move my cursor around, you can see that the number is changing. And so to specify the first point, simply press your left mouse button and then move your cursor and click anywhere else in the model space. And you can see that we have created a vertex. And I can select another point as well. Okay, to finish drawing a line, simply press the escape key, and you can see that we have drawn our line. And to select this line, you can click on it using your cursor. So here you can see that we've actually created two lines and they're not joined together. So let's say we wanted to have these two lines actually joined together instead of separated. We can draw using a polyline instead, which is this button over here. So if we click on that and then we start drawing, escape. And if I click on it, then you can see that we have a joined polyline. And usually you'll be drawing with a polyline instead of lines because polylines are essentially like an upgraded version of the line and is usually easier to work. You can also select objects by clicking the left mouse button and dragging your cursor to the left. And this creates a green selection box that basically selects everything it touches. So you can see if I move the cursor further to the left, I'm selecting the polyline. And if I move it even further, you can see that I'm selecting the two lines as well. And then if I press the left mouse button again, you can see that everything has been selected. You can also select objects by clicking on the left mouse button and dragging your cursor to the right. And you can see that this creates a blue selection box that only selects objects that are completely inside the area of the blue selection box. And so here you can see that I've selected a line and the polyline, but the other line hasn't been selected as it isn't completely inside the blue selection box. We also have a few other drawing tools here, such as the circle. And if I click on this circle button, AutoCAD is telling me to specify a center point for the circle. And so I'll just click here, create the circle. And you can see as I drag my mouse around, I'm specifying the radius of the circle. Let's say I wanted a specific radius. What I can do now is I can type directly into my keyboard and enter a value such as 900. And then if I press enter, you can see that I've drawn a circle with an exact radius of 900. And if I click on the circle here, you can see that in the properties tab over here, it is informing me that the circle that I selected has a radius of 900. And if you don't have this properties tab open, then all you have to do is come down here to the command line and type in properties. And you can see that the properties option has shown up. And if you click on this, then the properties tab will open up for you. So the other drawing option we have is the arc. You can see that I can create a 3-point arc. So now I'll specify the second point of the arc. And now I'll specify the endpoint of the arc. And now my arc has been created. So these are some of the basic ways that you can draw in AutoCAD. And feel free to explore some of the other drawing options as well. Okay, so we can also modify what we have drawn by coming here to the Modify tab. So let's say I'd like to move my circle to another position. Well, I can select it and come to the Move button here, and I can move it around. So here you can see that AutoCAD is telling me to specify a base point for the Move command. Think of this as sort of the point that the object is anchored to when we're moving it around. So if I select somewhere over here, you can see that the circle is moving relative to how I move the base point. You might have been noticing some green lines that have been showing up, and essentially there are some settings that have been activated to assist you with your drafting in AutoCAD. And to customize those settings, you can come down to these buttons over here. And so you can see that if I select my circle and move it around, my circle is snapping to this green dashed line over here. And if I move it down to the bottom, you can see that it's also snapping to this green line here. And this is being triggered by this option down here called polar tracking, which is basically restricting my cursor to these specific angles. And you can see right now it's being set to 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and so on. And so if I turn this off, you can see that the snapping is no longer happening. So if we come to this button here, you can see that it is controlling the object snap setting. And this is one of the most important settings that you should always have turned on in AutoCAD. And essentially what this does is it allows your cursor to snap to certain points so that your drawings are clean and tidy. And what do I mean by this? Well, you can see that if I draw a polyline by typing in PL, which is a shortcut for polyline, and press enter, you can see that if I hover over the polyline that I just created, it's snapping to the endpoint of the polyline. And now I can start drawing my new polyline from that snap. And so if I didn't have this option selected, and if I draw a new polyline, you can see that I can't actually snap to any of these points anymore. And so let's say I wanted to continue this polyline drawing, I can't snap to the point. And you can see that I'll just have all these weird little gaps in my drawing, which is not what you want. So I highly recommend that you always have Object Snap turned on. And if I click on this arrow here, a bunch of new options have appeared. I know that there are a lot of options here, but you'll slowly understand what each of these options do as you start using AutoCAD more. For now, AutoCAD has already turned on endpoint, center, intersection, and extension snapping. I'll also turn on midpoint as I usually use this when I'm drafting in AutoCAD. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the snapping options that we have turned on. So you've already seen the endpoint snapping option, and just to show you again, that's the endpoint snapping. And we also have snapping to a midpoint, which is represented by this triangle here. And you can also snap to the center of a circle by hovering over the edges of the circle, and you can see that we can snap to the center just like that. So if you press your left mouse button, you can see that our polyline has snapped to the center. And if I draw another polyline like this, you can see that I can also snap to intersections between two objects, in this case, two polylines. And a shortcut in AutoCAD is if you want to repeat the command that you just used, in our case, the polyline, then all you have to do is press the space button again, and AutoCAD will activate that command for you again. So I'll just press space, and you can see that I can draw another polyline. So we can also copy objects that we have drawn by selecting an object and coming here to the copy command. And just like the move command, we can specify a base point. So I can choose the center of the circle, and I can move it around and copy it, just like that. Another command that we're going to be using a lot is the rotate command. So here I have an object, and let's say I would like to rotate it. Well, I can select it, come to the rotate button, then I can select a base point, and I can rotate it just like that. I can also enter a specific angle that I would like to use for the rotation. So if I click on this base point again, and let's say I want to rotate it clockwise by 50 degrees. If you want to rotate clockwise in AutoCAD, then you need to add a negative sign in front of your number, because anti-clockwise is positive and clockwise is negative. And you can see I've rotated it 50 degrees clockwise. Let's also take a look at the trim command. So I'm going to draw a polyline that intersects this shape. And let's say I don't want this area over here. So I can come here to the trim command and trim the area of the shape that I don't want, just like that. And you can see I've trimmed the shape right at the polyline that I drew. The command that complements the trim command is the extend command. So let's say I draw another polyline, and I'd like this polyline to extend all the way to this polyline here. I can type into my keyboard EX for extend, then I can select my polyline and it will extend all the way to the nearest line. Let's also take a look at the fillet command. So the fillet command is really useful when joining two lines, and we can access it by clicking on the fillet button here. When using the fillet command, we can specify a radius for the fillet. If we come down to the command line here, you can see that we have some options. Let's click on radius, and let's specify a radius of 50. And now we can select our first object and our second object to apply the fillet. And if I zoom in a little bit, you can see that a fillet of radius 50 has been created. And if you'd like to create okay, so let's say I'd like to delete this section and redraw my fillet. So I can use the trim command and draw two polylines, one here and one here. However, there's a better command to use for this situation, which is the break command. So type break into your keyboard, and it is prompting us to select an object. And so if I select my polyline, I can now break it just like that. Okay, so now let's create our fillet again. And now I'm going to select radius and specify a fillet radius of 0. And I'm going to select these two polylines. And you can see a vertex has been created instead of a curve. Okay, let's say you'd like to draw perfectly vertical and horizontal lines. Well, there is a setting in AutoCAD that allows you to do that, and it's the orthographic setting here. So you can see that ortho mode has been turned on at the moment, and when I draw my polylines, so you can see that I can only draw horizontally or vertically. And even if I move my cursor slightly to the right, the polyline that I'm drawing is still perfectly vertical. Another command that I'd like to introduce to you is the stretch command, and this command is really helpful for speeding up your drafting. So if we come to this command here, it's prompting me to select objects that I would like to stretch. Let's say I'd like to stretch these 3 polylines to the left. So if I press down my left mouse button and drag my cursor to the left, creating a green selection box, then press my left mouse button again, press enter, specify a base point, and then you can see that I can drag it to the left like that. And I have orthographic turned on so that I'm stretching it purely horizontally. Another command that I'd like to show you is the offset command. So let's say I have a polyline here and it does something like this. I can use the offset command to create another polyline that runs parallel to this polyline. So if I type OFF, I can specify an offset distance, for example 100, and I will select this polyline and offset it on this side. And if I go to this side, you can see that it's offsetting on the top side. And that's the offset command. Sometimes you might want to have multiple viewports in the model space. And to do this, we can come to the View tab and come to Viewport Configuration. And we can customize our viewport configuration. So right now it's set to single, and I can change this to 2 horizontal. And you can see now that I have 2 viewports, like so. And to go back to the single viewport, then just come back here and click on single. We can also use this navigation cube over here to rotate our view in model space. So if I click on this arrow here, you can see that the north arrow is now pointing to the left. And you can also drag the cube to go into 3D mode. And if you want to go back to 2D mode, then all you need to do is click on the top side. And we're just going to be covering 2D AutoCAD in this tutorial, and the 3D stuff is going to be outside of the scope of this video tutorial. Another really important command that I'd like to show you is selection cycling. And to turn on selection cycling, we can come down to the hamburger menu and ensure that selection cycling is turned on. And so now we can come down to this option down here and right click to go into selection cycling settings. And make sure that this setting is checked, display selection cycling list box. And I'm going to click OK. When your cursor is hovering over 2 objects that are right on top of each other, let me just move this a little closer. So when your cursor is hovering on 2 objects that are really close to each other, with selection cycling, you can see that I have these 2 square icons showing up next to my cursor, and that's selection cycling. So if I left click, you can see that the selection cycling dialog box has opened. And now from this dialog box, I can select which polyline I'd like to select. And if you didn't have this, and if you don't have selection cycling turned on, then you won't be able to open the selection cycling dialog box. And in this case, it will be really difficult for you to select the exact polyline that you want. Okay, so these are some of the basic commands, and there are still heaps of other useful commands that you can use, but I won't be going over all of them in this tutorial because it would just take way too long. And yeah, you probably won't be using all of the tools in AutoCAD, and it's just about finding the commands that you find really useful and adding it to your repertoire. Okay, so now that we have explored drawing objects and modifying them in AutoCAD, let's take a look at layers. So you can see right now that we're on layer 0, and this is sort of the default layer in AutoCAD. And I typically use this layer when I'm doing quick sketches that I'm going to delete later or convert into another layer later on. So if I click on this drop down, you can see that we only have one layer right now, and that's layer 0. Let's click on this button over here called Layer Properties. So here you can see a palette has opened that allows us to control the layers in our current drawing. To make these columns display a little bit better, let's right click on this row and select maximize all columns. Okay, that's looking a bit better. And let me drag this a little bit to the right. So here you can see that our current layer is layer 0 as indicated by this green tick. And you can see that there are a bunch of settings here for this layer. Okay, so before we dive into these settings, let's try creating a new layer instead of just having one layer called layer 0. So to create a new layer, come to this button here to create a new layer. And let's name this stormwater pipe. And now let's double click on it to make it our current layer. So if we come to the properties panel over here, you can see that the layer has changed to stormwater pipe. And it's indicating to us that this is our current layer. And since we're on a different layer, let's customize it a little bit so that it's different to layer 0. So if we come here to the color property and click on it, we can select a color that we'd like to use. So let's make it color 3, which represents green, and click OK. Okay, so now if I draw a polyline, you can see that it's now green. And congratulations, you have drawn your first stormwater pipe. Okay, so now what do these settings mean? So let's take a look at the light bulb button. This, as you would imagine, turns the layer on or off. And so if I click it, you can see that AutoCAD is displaying this pop-up telling me that it's the current layer. And if I turn it off, objects that I draw in the future using the stormwater pipe layer will also not be displayed. So let's turn the current layer off and see what happens. So you can see that my stormwater pipe that I just drew has disappeared because I've turned the stormwater pipe layer off. And if I draw another polyline, you can see that I'm drawing it, but nothing's actually showing up. And for beginners, this could be really confusing because you could be drawing things and copying things, but if the layer that the object is using is turned off, then it will seem like nothing is happening. And then when you turn the layer back on, you've realized you've copied like 100 of those objects. So if I turn the layer back on, you can see that I actually have drawn the stormwater pipe. It just didn't display because it was turned off. Okay, so what about the freeze setting? Let's click on it to see what happens. Okay, AutoCAD is saying that our layer can't be frozen because it is the current layer. So we have to actually switch to a different layer first before we can freeze it. So let's go back to layer 0. Then I'm going to click on stormwater pipe and you can see that it has been frozen and it has disappeared. And so you may ask, well, what's the difference between the freeze setting and the on or off setting? Essentially, when you have a layer switched off using the light bulb, you can't see the layer, but when you're moving around and you're zooming in and out of your drawing, the off layers are still being re-rendered by the computer, even though you can't see it. But when you have it frozen, the computer isn't actively regenerating those layers and those objects. So it's pretty much a performance enhancement if you freeze objects instead of turning them on or off using the light bulb. So let's unfreeze our stormwater pipe layer. Okay, so what about the lock setting? Well, it's sort of what you would expect. If I click on it, you can see that if I hover over my stormwater pipe, it's got this lock icon showing up next to it. And if I try to move it, you can see that it's not letting me do it and I can't edit it. So that's the lock command. And you might use the lock command when you have a satellite image of a specific area and you probably wouldn't be editing that image in your drawing. And so you could set the layer of that satellite image to be locked so that you don't accidentally delete it or move it. Okay, so what about this button here? This is the plot button, and essentially if we have this turned off, all objects on this layer won't be printed. Okay, and now we come to the color property, which you have already seen, and this is where we can select the color for our layer. And right now you can see that I've selected the green color. And so the next property is line weight. So let's click on the line weight, and I'm going to set it to something like 0.7 millimeters. And you can see that the width of the stormwater line has been increased. And if you can't see, and if the line weight isn't showing up for you, then come down here and select the line weight display button to show your line weights. Because if it's switched off, you won't be able to see it. And if this button isn't here, then come over here to this hamburger menu and ensure that you have the line weight option checked. And so the thing about line weight is that it is a visual property because you can switch it on or off by using this line weight display button here. And also, if I zoom in or out of the drawing, you can see that the line weight is actually changing so that it's remaining consistent. So let's change the line weight back to default for now. Another way to change the thickness of our polyline is by using the global width. So if I select my polyline and I come here to this property called global width, and let's say I assign it a value of say 0.5, and if I zoom in a little bit, you can see that as I zoom in or out of the drawing, the global width isn't scaling itself so that it remains visually consistent. That's because I have modified the polyline so that its actual shape and width is 0.5 units. So if I change the global width to something like 100, you can see now that it actually has a width of 100. And if I draw another polyline just to measure it, you can see that it has a width of 100. And it doesn't scale if I zoom in or out because it literally has a width of 100. And that's the difference between global width and line weight. So the next setting is the transparency setting, and if I click on it, I can adjust the transparency value of my object. So I can give it a value of say 70. And you can see that the transparency of my stormwater pipe has decreased. So here's another setting called New Viewport Freeze, but this is sort of an advanced setting, and since we won't be covering everything in this video, we'll be skipping this for today. Alright, the next thing that we're going to look at is drawing this basic detail in AutoCAD and annotating it with dimensions and angles, just like you can see here. Alright, before we get started, let's create a new layer called Details. If I open up the layer properties again by typing in LA into my keyboard, I can open up the layer properties, and since I've already drawn the detail and annotated it with dimensions, AutoCAD automatically creates this layer called def points. And this is something that AutoCAD does automatically and you don't really need to worry about it. So let's go ahead and create our new layer and name it Details. And let's double click on it to make it our current layer. Okay, so let's start off by drawing a circle with a radius of 100. So now I'm going to specify the center point, and I'm going to specify a radius of 100. Okay, so to create this outer circle over here, we're going to be using another command called offset. And it's exactly as the name suggests, we're going to offset the outer circle a certain distance from our circle here. So if I type in OFF for offset and press enter, then I'm going to specify an offset distance, which is going to be 50, and press enter. Then I'm going to select my circle as the object to offset. and I'm going to click on a point that is outside of my circle and click on the left mouse button and then escape to exit the offset command. And you can see that I've created this outer circle here. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is draw this polyline over here. And I would like to begin my polyline from this point of the circle. And you can see right now that I don't have object snapping turned on. So I'm going to turn it on and go into the menu here and select quadrant. So now this will allow me to select the quadrants of a circle. And you can see it's being represented by this diamond shape here. And I can also snap to the other quadrants like so. So I'm going to snap to this one. And I'm going to turn on orthographic mode. And you can do this by pressing F8 on your keyboard, which is the shortcut key for orthographic. And you can see I'm drawing in orthographic now. And I'll specify a length of 500. So now to draw the 45-degree line. Okay, so now to draw this 45-degree line over here, I'm going to turn off orthographic mode by pressing F8 again. Then I'm going to come down here and turn on polar tracking and set it to 45, 90, 135 degrees, and so on. And now I'm going to draw my other polyline. And you can see I can snap to the 45-degree angle. And I can also draw a horizontal line which is snapping to the 0-degree line. Alright, I'm just going to shift this down a little bit so that we have a bit more space. Okay, so for what I'm going to show you next, I'm just going to turn off Object Snap for now. I'm going to draw another polyline starting from this quadrant of the circle here. And if I draw my polyline, you can see I don't have Object Snap turned on, and so it's not snapping to anything. So let's say you don't have Object Snap turned on, or you have Object Snap turned on, but you don't have a specific setting such as the quadrant setting turned on. So instead of going into the Object Snap menu and turning it on, you can use a shortcut by holding down Shift and then pressing down your right mouse button. And this will open up Object Snap settings in this mini dialog box, and I can select quadrant. And so just for this instance, I can snap to the quadrant. And now I'm going to draw my horizontal line. And now I'm just going to complete this shape. I'm going to turn on Object Snap again by pressing the shortcut key F3. And to join these two polylines together, I'm going to use the fillet command. Enter, and I'm going to specify a radius of 200, and you can see that it's already set to 200, so I'm just going to press enter. And I'm going to select my two polylines. Okay, cool, so now our detail is complete. And all we need to do now is annotate it. So to annotate our detail, just come up here to the annotation tab and come to this little button over here. And you can see right now I've set it to arc length. And if I click on this tiny arrow, it'll come up with a bunch of annotation options. So let's just annotate the diameter of the circle for now. So now I'm going to click on the circle and press my left mouse button again, and you can see that this dimension is super tiny and I can't see anything unless I zoom in like this. And if I come to this dimension over here, you can see that it's displaying with a normal size. So if I click on this one and come here to the Properties tab you can see that I've increased the arrow size to 20 and I've increased the text height to 20 as well. And I can change it by clicking on this property and entering a new value. And you can see the text height is changing. So I'm just going to change it back to 20. Let's say I'm kind of lazy and I don't want to enter those values again for this dimension down here. So what I can do is click on this dimension and type into my keyboard MA. And this stands for match properties. And essentially this is going to copy over the properties of the dimension I've selected onto another dimension. And you can use this for layers as well. You can use this for line styles. So now I'm going to select my destination object, and in this case it's the dimension, and you can see that my dimension is now displaying properly. Now let's show an angle here. So we're going to come back to our little drop down menu and come here to angular. Then I'm going to select this line here, and I'm going to select the second line. And I'm going to move my cursor over here so that the angle is displaying on the right side. And now I'm going to use the match properties function again. Okay, so now have a go at dimensioning this line here so that you can see its length, and also try dimensioning the length of this arc and displaying it properly using the techniques that I have just showed you. Okay, so now what we're going to be looking at is the paper space. And so we're going to come down here to layout 1, and you can see that this has taken us to our sheets. And you can see that we have this piece of paper here, and we also have this rectangular box called a viewport that's looking into our model space. And if you double click into this viewport, you can see that we are now inside the model space as represented by these lines becoming bolder, and also this navigation cube, I don't know what it's exactly called, showing up, and you can see I can move around just like that. And I can also draw stuff in the model space through this viewport. For example, I can draw a polyline just like that. And if I click outside of the viewport, you can see now that I'm in the paper space. And I can also draw things in paper space as well. For example, I can draw a circle. And you can see that this is in paper space. And it's not in model space, because if I click back into model space, you can see I can't actually select the circle because it's in paper space. When you're in paper space and you create a viewport, it's sort of like you have a piece of paper and there's a hole in the piece of paper, and your piece of paper is on top of the model space, and you're looking through that hole into the model space. So if I click back into the model space, I don't want these grids showing up, so I can come down here and turn off the grid mode, and you can see that the grids have disappeared. And I'm going to delete this polyline that I drew before, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit so that my detail is showing up correctly. You can see that when I'm zooming in and out like this, the scale down here is changing. And if I click on this scale, you can see that I can choose a bunch of preset scales. So I'm going to select 1 and 5. Okay, that's a bit too zoomed in, so I'm going to select 1 and 10. And you can see that this is fitting pretty well. Okay, so now that I have my viewport in the correct position and the scale is also set up properly, I can come down here and click on this lock button to lock my viewport so that it doesn't accidentally move around. And you can see now that when I try to navigate through my viewport, it's not doing anything, and I also can't zoom in or out. Okay, so right now my viewport has a scale of 1 in 10. And so what this essentially means is that for every unit of paper space, it is 10 units of model space. So if I click out of model space and come to paper space, I can actually draw a line just above my detail. and you can see that it has a length of 30. This is 30 millimeters in Paperspace, and in model space I currently have units in millimeters as well. And so 30 millimeters times 10 is 300 millimeters, which gives me that 1 in 10 scale. So if I go back to model space, you can see what units you're currently using by typing UN. And you can see that my model space is currently in millimeters. So let's go back to Paperspace, and I'm going to delete my polyline that I've drawn in Paperspace. Okay, let's take a look at some more settings regarding the viewport. So if I click back into the viewport and open up the layer properties, and let me just change this display. So our detail is drawn in the details layer, and so let's say we didn't want this details layer to show up in this viewport only. So we can actually click on this button called the viewport freeze to freeze the details layer only in this viewport, and you can see that it has disappeared. But when we come to the model, it's still displaying in the model space. That's because we have only frozen it in that viewport. So if I come back here, you can see that the layers properties is actually updating when I switch back to this viewport. So let me just uncheck this. So that's a viewport freeze. Another option you can see here is color and viewport color. So color is the actual color it has in model space, and we can also change its color so that it displays differently in, for example, this viewport. So I can change the color to pink, and you can see that the color has changed to pink. But when I go back to model space, you can see that it's still white. Alright, so you may be wondering why the color white is actually black here in the paper space. And if we go back to the model space, you can see that white is white. So if I click on this color here, you can see that it is using the index color 7. And this is actually a special type of color. It basically changes its color depending on the background color. So in model space, the background is dark, so the color becomes white. And then in paper space, since the background is white, it inverts its color to become black. Now let's look at customizing some of the printing settings. So click on Control P, and you'll see that AutoCAD will open up this dialog box. And right now, my paper size is set to A4, and I would like to change this to landscape A3. So I'm going to click on this option, and you can see that I'm now in the A3 paper size, and I'm going to select a printer, and I'm going to select DWG to PDF. And so when I print my drawing, it's going to turn into a PDF file. And here I'm also going to select a plot style, and I'm going to select AutoCAD for now. And let's click on this edit button to see what this plot style table is all about. And essentially, this plot style table editor has printing settings for every single color for the index colors used in your drawing. So you can see here, every single color right now has exactly the same settings, but it's pretty common for engineering drawings to have this set up in a way that different colors have different line weights, and even use a color that is different to the color in the drawing. For example, the color yellow might be set to, instead of using object color, it might be set to black, and it's set to a thicker line weight, such as 0.35. And I'm just going to cancel this for now and click no. And so I can preview what my drawing will look like when I have printed it by clicking on this button. And you can see that my viewport is pretty small compared to my paper space, which is now A3. So I'll just need to resize my viewport to fit the paper space better. And I'm going to click apply to layout so that these printing settings are applied, and I don't have to change the settings again. And I'm going to close this for now, and I'm going to move this closer to the center. Alright, so now what we're going to do is draw our title block on our sheet. And so here you can see I've already created a new layer called title block. So I'm going to switch to this layer, and then I'm going to close the layer properties. And so here you can see there is a dashed line which represents the printable area, which basically represents the area that's going to show up when I print my sheet. So I'm going to draw my title block so that it's within this area. And I'm just going to draw my title block using polylines. And I have ortho mode on so that I draw perfectly vertical and horizontal lines. And down here I'm going to include some more information about this drawing, such as the name of the drawing, the name of the project, the scale, and so on. And I'm going to move this line slightly so that it's inside of the printable area. And I can click on it and move it up by stretching this midpoint. And now I'm just going to connect this point with the left side. And here I can use the extend command. And then I'm just going to trim this excess. Okay, so now I'm just going to add some vertical lines to separate this section into a few different areas. Now I'm going to hold down my shift key and right click and choose the nearest snapping option. Now you can see I'm snapping to this polyline and I can choose exactly where I want to snap. So I'm going to choose somewhere around here, and I'm going to hold down shift again and then right click, and this time I'm going to choose perpendicular. And now I can snap perpendicular to this polyline that I drew down here and press escape. And now what I can do is select this polyline, type in CO for copy, and I can copy it to the right. And I'm going to turn off object snap, and I'm going to move it somewhere around here. Okay, let me just shift these across a little bit. Okay, now our title block is starting to look pretty good. I'm just going to add in some text to provide information about this sheet. So I'm going to come back to the Annotate tab and click on multi-line text, and now I'm going to create a text here and specify the opposite corner of the text, and I'm going to name it project name. So I can hold down this little slider here and slide it out so that all of my text fit on one line. And if you double click this slider, you can see that it snaps perfectly to the text. And now I'm going to select this text and copy it a few more times. And I have ortho mode turned on, so I'm just going to move it horizontally like that. And I'm going to name this text to drawing title. And then here I will change the text to original size, which is the size of the sheet. And then this one will be called original scale. Okay, so now our title block has been created, and all we need to do now is convert this title block into a AutoCAD block. And essentially a block is just like a bundle of lines or text that you can reuse. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is select my title block and click on this button here to create a new block. And I'm going to name the block title block. A3, and I'm going to specify a base point by picking the point, and I'm going to click on this corner down here with object snap turned on, and now I'm going to click OK. And you can see now when I click on my title block, you can see that it has turned into a block reference. Okay, so you may ask, why is it called a block reference instead of just being called a block? Alright, so what I'm going to do is type insert into my keyboard. And this basically opens up a dialog box that contains all of the block definitions in my drawing. And you can see right now I'm in the favorites tab, and I have the title block A3 definition here. Essentially, the title block I have here is an instance of this title block definition. If you have a bit of experience in programming, then this will make a lot of sense to you. It's kind of like when in programming you have a class and you're creating essentially an instance of that class. You have a single block definition here, and instances are basically just copies of the block definition. But essentially a block definition is the blueprint or the template. Alright, cool. So now we have our title block sorted out, and you can populate these fields with text to provide more information about the drawing and have a go at populating these fields yourself. And once you have done that, you can print your drawing by pressing Ctrl P again. And I'm going to click OK and choose where you want to save your PDF file and give your file a name. I'm just going to name it tutorial for now. Okay, sweet. So now you can see the DWG drawing has been printed into a PDF, and I'm using the Adobe Acrobat reader, but you might be using a different PDF reader such as Bluebeam. And you can see that some lines aren't showing up because they're not within the boundaries of the printable area, so I'm just going to go back to the DWG file and fix that. Alright, so because our title block is actually a block now, we can't just resize the block however we want, like a polyline for example. So we need to click on the block and right click and go to block editor. And so here we can edit the block. So I can use the stretch command and shift this top area down a little bit. And this side as well. I'm just going to line this up, and now I'm going to close the block editor, and I'm going to save the changes to title block A3. However, you can resize the block by using a command called the scale command. So I've clicked on my block reference and I can scale it by typing SC, and I can specify a base point. And you can see I can scale it like that. But if you need to stretch or modify particular sections of the block, for example, you would like to shift this line to the left, then you need to go into the block editor to edit the block definition. And now when I print this again, I'll just create a copy of this. Alright, you can see that all the lines are printing correctly now in the PDF file. And when you use the block editor to edit a block, it is changing the block definition. And so what happens is that this changes all block instances in your drawing. So if you make a change to a block editor, this change is reflected across all instances. So let me create another block just to show you what I mean. So I've created this circle here, and now I'm going to create a block from the circle. I'm going to call this block circle and specify a base point. I'm going to press Shift and right click to get the center and click OK. Alright, so now my circle is a block reference. So let me just create a few copies of this block reference. So now if I go into the block editor and reduce the size of the circle and save the changes, you can see that all instances of the circle block have shrunk. And this is what I mean by when you change the block definition by using the block editor, it applies these changes to all block instances. So yeah, that's it for this video, and I hope that this 1 hour video tutorial on AutoCAD was helpful to you and has provided you value. And if you found this video of value to you, then please like this video and subscribe to my channel for future content. Thank you for watching.